and good morning to everybody. It's a nice Saturday morning for us to be talking about healthcare and private equity investments. My name is Girish, and I'll be moderating this session till about 10:45. What we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the statistics out there in healthcare and investment. And then I'm going to bring on the three panelists, and we're going to have a little bit of a round robin session. And we shall also end with a little bit of a focused conversation amongst the four of us around some of the areas that I think the audience would be interested in. To start with, maybe I can share some statistics which we've prepared. As we can see, because of the COVID pandemic, healthcare has become pretty strategic for Malaysia. We do see some changes in the last 12 months in terms of statistics, but the most important statistics that we see is actually the level of healthcare in Malaysia is actually got a two-pronged approach towards it because of the private sector and government. So if we look at the global scenario, we can see healthcare forecasted to grow at anywhere from about 2 CAGR right up to about 3 to 4 because of COVID. It is a large sector on its own, 100 billion over in terms of spend, especially on Malaysia's side with COVID. We have just seen the Prime Minister announce an increase of the COVID expenditure to more than 100 billion as well, from about 60 billion. In terms of the ratios, one doctor for every 454 population. I think this is something that needs to improve. We also see the primary causes for hospitalization mainly being due to infectious disease, circulatory system disease, and of course respiratory. The main ones on private hospitals are actually respiratory disease, which is what we're talking about with COVID as well. So there are statistics out there that put COVID into a very serious respiratory disease, and that's was there before. It's just been alarming and a lot more congestion. Next slide, please. So when we are looking at the investment scene, we feel there definitely needs to be a lot more focus, and there are opportunities as well. From private equity investments, I think a lot of the money is going into financial services and infocom. We see a lot of that taking place. And when we look at venture capital, surprisingly, a lot of it is actually heading towards medical and biotechnology in 2020. And infocom followed second. So we feel the timing is right. There is a focus around healthcare, and globally we also have seen the last 2-3 quarters a significant amount of deal counts growing at a higher rate compared to the last 10 years. Some of the leading ones are generally in the region. I think Singapore tends to lead a lot of these investments, as we have seen with what GIC has been doing and others. Next slide, please. We feel there are a couple of trends taking place already in the space of healthcare. AI, SaaS, I think the SaaS model of subscription-based would be something that's going to come out. Telehealth has already been there. We will be hearing from some of the speakers on all of this. Medical devices, in terms of more advanced medical devices, and mental health. I think mental health is a very key issue here for Malaysia as well. We're seeing it prevalent in all society. Digital therapeutics and omics around genomics and so on, and of course health IT. So this is just setting a trend, so we can get into a better discussion. And the whole healthcare industry has actually received an uplift in the last quarter in Q2. The uplift has just gone up significantly. So let me stop sharing, and how I'd like to take this is to introduce our first panelist, Encik Amirul Faris Wan Zahir, CEO of Xeraya Capital. Welcome, Amirul. If I can just do a brief introduction. He's an actuary, investor, fund manager with Khazanah, and they manage a 500 million US fund on innovative healthcare. And interestingly, today is also his parents' 60th wedding anniversary, which he's busy planning. So thank you for spending some time with us today, Faris. Maybe I would like to start off with a question around, we've been talking about vaccines. Yeah, we've been talking about vaccines and what's going on in that space. And is Xeraya looking at that? I think that would be my first question to you. Over to you, Faris.
Sure, thank you. So thanks very much for the question, Girish, and the kind introduction. So firstly, I also would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak in this conference. Also to thank the other speakers. I enjoyed listening to session 1 and 2. I did have an opportunity to sit on some of them. It was really some interesting and great ideas there. Really appreciate it, and I thank you, Girish. So getting back to the question in terms of the area of vaccines. So Xeraya has invested in quite a number of different areas in healthcare. Quite a few of it you captured in your slides, whether it's in therapeutics, in the cardiovascular space, and so forth. In there are vaccines, yes. We have a particular company that we invested in. That maybe I could share the slides. If we could move to, since the question went straight to the vaccines, maybe to the slide number 3, please. This one, yeah, thank you. So this particular company was an interesting one that came through one of the funds initially. And when we first invested in the company, they had this a cell-free bioprocessing platform that was very interesting in itself because it could produce end products that was very, very cheap. And the fund that had invested in it was focused on the sustainability by the agriculture. So it was an attractive opportunity for us because it had this a proprietary platform that we believe could replace the existing chemicals that's being used in the industry at the time. And then why it's important is that in the agriculture space, you need to make lots of the quantities, whether it's pesticides and so forth, very cheaply because you don't have reimbursements and things like of that nature as you do in healthcare. And but what was also interesting is that the person that's in the slide there, his name is Andre. Andre is the CEO. His background is actually in healthcare. So when it could, there was a proof of concept that their platform can produce RNA very cheaply in the agriculture space, he was very excited. He said, well, the applications of this in healthcare is immense. I mean, the opportunities is huge. So they went into the healthcare space addressing influenza. They had very good preclinical data. And then the pandemic hit. So when the pandemic hit, it obviously hit the whole world. They were only about a month into the healthcare or the influenza space. And he was thinking, you know what, with this platform, we can actually respond to this pandemic and perhaps produce a vaccine that could address the COVID-19 virus. And there were a few other mRNA companies out there that were working on other things that also felt that they could pivot Moderna and BioNTech being two other companies that felt that, well, their platform, although originally was looking at the areas of oncology, is a platform that could pivot into vaccines. But because they had been focusing on healthcare much longer, in fact, that's what the focus is, i.e. Moderna and BioNTech, they were able to move fairly quickly into this area. The rest of it, I guess, is history, in a sense that when we made the investment into Greenlight, specifically into the opportunity of using that platform to address the vaccines, at the time it wasn't so straightforward because there was no mRNA vaccines to begin with, and it was a bit split in terms of views out there whether it's actually possible to produce a vaccine that would be effective enough using the mRNA platform. But the rest is history, in the sense that we had within 300 days the approval of the first vaccine through BioNTech and Pfizer. They teamed up, and Moderna came in soon after that. And they probably have the best numbers in terms of shots in the arms, in terms of efficacy and so forth, with respect to some of the other vaccine platforms. So Greenlight is still working on it, and what would be intriguing for us is that they are using a platform which Andre has been saying all along, is that mRNA is a really good platform, but because the applications of it in the past has been in the healthcare area, and cost and quantums wasn't much of an issue to address, because you don't have to produce as much volumes of mRNA within the healthcare space, within the therapeutic space, because you could you could also charge much higher because of the reimbursements. The issue of producing lots of quantities of mRNA at very, very low cost wasn't there to begin with. And that's where Andre was saying that we will probably have issues of bottlenecks going forward. And I think some of this is we're experiencing now. And where we believe it could be an interesting opportunity for us is to roll out the platform that Greenlight has, because they're able to produce mRNA at much lower cost than the existing manufacturers, because of their proprietary platform, and they'll be able to produce lots of it. And because things are going to be modular in terms of the architecture itself, the thinking is that you could produce manufacturing facilities, for example, in this part of the region, in Southeast Asia. Of course, we'd like it to be in Malaysia, but there's other countries that Singapore and Indonesia also would like it to be in their country. The Middle East, for example, perhaps one in the UAE could perhaps be a supplier of vaccines in that part of the region. And they are also speaking to Africa, obviously. South Africa and Rwanda are the two countries that's a bit advanced in terms of possibly adopting their platform for the African nations. And the UK is the other country. So this is, in answering your question is yes, we do have a portfolio company that's working on this, and it's work in progress. We do have a party that could potentially be involved in perhaps a rollout of this in Malaysia, but it's still work in progress.
Wonderful. It's great to see Khazanah is already ahead of the curve on this. Can I just drill down one more level in terms of Xeraya's activities in private equity in healthcare? If you could just walk us through that, and I'd like to maybe see if you can share with us a little bit about what your horizon looks like. What are you analyzing right now for potential investment, and is there a particular segment that Malaysian businesses in the healthcare chain could actually participate?
Yeah. So when we make investments, I guess overall the way in which we make investments is we look at deals globally. We don't look at specific any geography. It doesn't matter actually. We see a particular technology that we believe is frontier or up there. And for us, because our network is actually more glued in this region itself, we provide, I guess, differentiation to any syndicates out there invested into those companies, linkages to this part of the world, in a sense that, market access is one, cost advantages being the other one. And we've done this quite a few times. And that's one of the a few reasons why the other co-investors continue to invite us, because they, we've worked on a few deals together in the past, and they said, gee, you seem to have that differentiation in terms of adding value to the portfolio companies in a way that we ourselves, because they may be quite sophisticated in their geography, whether it's US and so forth, but maybe less so. And there's huge advantages because for example, in the medical device space, where you have our portfolio companies that are manufacturing things over there, you could manufacture exactly the same thing at just a fraction of the cost over here. There's a bit of an ecosystem in Penang, but the question is they just don't know who to speak to and so forth. And because we have a network of people who can arrange these meetings very quickly, you can speak to Mr. A from this company, Mr. B from this company, and so forth. When you come down to Malaysia or this part of the region, we'll set the appointments accordingly. And before you know it, we come to a win-win situation that, yes, we can actually manufacture these things in Malaysia with the same quality, with the same, which needs to meet those regulatory standards at much cheaper cost. So that's on the cost side. In some cases, it's market access. So it's a case of, for example, a company that may want to see whether they could access, say, hospital groups, because hospital groups may have systems in there which could be useful for them as a client. For example, in the case of one of the portfolio companies, Congenica, where there's a cross between genomics and AI, where they have a client in the UK already and building clients elsewhere in the world. They felt that perhaps they could be hospital groups in this region that could benefit from it, and obviously would make the necessary introductions. IHH obviously is the more obvious one, partly because of its linkages, but we are quite familiar with other groups too. So those are the ways in which the connectivity of what we do and how we invest to this part of the region, and we can't really underestimate. When we say region, there's Singapore, there's Malaysia, there's Indonesia, but the ecosystem in certain areas in Malaysia is just, for example, in the medtech space, is just superior to the other countries anyway. So even if you do show possible opportunities in Singapore, Indonesia, and elsewhere, they may choose. In fact, they do choose Malaysia in more often than not, because Singapore may have a deeper ecosystem, perhaps in the pharma side, but in the medtech side, less so. And the cost aspect, we would be, we'd be cheaper than things in Singapore. So that's where that's how things come about.
Sure, thank you. In terms of current your portfolio in healthcare, is there something that you can share on what Xeraya is doing or what
Sure. Doing? Yeah. Well, actually, the deck of slides that I had, so one was green light. I only shared 3. There's another slide that covers a bit. If you move to the next slide, please. The second one. Now, obviously, we do have more than 3 companies in our portfolio, but I thought I'd share these 3. So I mentioned a little bit about Congenica, where it's a company that's in the cross between the advances that we're seeing in the sciences side and what we're seeing in the tech side, i.e. AI. So I think I mentioned this, the genomic side, where things are now a lot cheaper to sequence the human genome than in the past. That it makes it a lot easier to scale businesses that combine these, AI as well as genomics. And that's a company that was located out of Cambridge in the UK. The other one is Interven, another portfolio company where it is also a cross between areas in the sciences and tech. So in the sciences, the relationship between glycans within the blood itself or carbohydrates and the patterns there vis-a-vis what it could mean whether you have, say, disease indications like cancer. The science behind that relationship is quite strong and sound. But the problem is to actually use that in practice. It is just very hard to get that relationship quickly enough as a tool, and therefore the standard of care will be more of tissue biopsy, where you basically take the tissue and to make sure whether you do have the cancer. And to do it as a liquid biopsy is just in the past almost impossible. But with the advent of AI, the ability to process that relationship becomes real. And they have a nice platform there that when they tested it against nasal cancer, and that study was done in Malaysia out of under the purview of NIH, the relationship was very, very high, well above 90%, in a sense that vis-a-vis, say, the standard of care. And that led to, when we invested at that point in time, was to strengthen that proof of concept of the platform that they have vis-a-vis data out there. And it convinced other new investors that came in more recently. I think it was announced a couple of weeks ago, Series C, where SoftBank led that round. And with the amount of money that they raised, 200 million over US dollars, would allow them to look at a lot more other disease indications. I think they have 16 lined up. And if you have something that's not invasive and you can just use, i.e. liquid biopsies, effectively using the blood, and being able to have that relationship without necessarily using tissue biopsy, because that can be very, very invasive, there's a lot of opportunities that could come about from that. So that's another interesting company, Interven. It's interesting because it's a company that's based in South San Francisco. But when you look at the composition of the people there, including the CEO is actually Filipino, the CFO is Indonesian, the BD person is Malaysian. They have an office in TPM, Technology Park Malaysia, or presence there. And they do all quite a bit of the trials, in Malaysia and the US. And so it helps when you have more diverse set of data, right? In that sense. So that's where it's another portfolio company that we've invested in that has that connectivity to Malaysia.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. So these are recent investments in 2019 and 2020. What's your outlook on sort of private equity horizons for spaces like this? Are you all do you all have a plan on how you would exit, or what's that model like?
Yeah. So when we come into an investment, and we tend to invest in slightly earlier stage. So although you could say it's private equity because it's not public listed type of equity that we invest in, but some call it maybe nearing venture, kind of, within that horizon. But even within that, when we get into investment, we're thinking of monetizing our investment in the 3 to 5 year range. And that's a reasonable enough range for our investor group to also appreciate. It's much aligned with their time horizon. And sometimes the reality is whenever you make investment, things sometimes don't work to plan. So therefore that 3 to 5 year could be a little bit missed out to 6 years and so forth. But if you plan to something that's a lot longer, then there's not much margin for error. So getting back to your question, is about the 3 to 5 year kind of horizon, and depends on when the fund starts. We may have a bit more leeway for a longer time horizon at the start of the fund, and then it becomes shorter, with time.
Sure. So thank you for that sharing. I think what I wanted to talk about was also about this asset-based type of investments. If that is something that you feel that Malaysian private equity needs to go into, the IHH models of going into more hospitals, and in particular, if you could give us your view on secondary healthcare, things around nursing homes and things around rehabilitation centers, and moving down that secondary healthcare. Is that something that you see there's opportunities?
Well, I'm sure there's opportunities there. Where we specialize in is in the areas where innovation is highest per se, and therefore it tends to be concentrated on the therapeutic space. And but it's not to say that there will be opportunities across the board in healthcare in the way I see it, in two ways. One is that if we just I had another slide, maybe the first slide, if you could. Thank you. So won't go through the all of this, but essentially, if we look at, say, over the last decade, where it was the tech companies that dominated, and they dominated because firstly there was they have cost advantages, they have unfair advantages of cost, and they have unfair advantages in terms of programmability, because it's easy, the programs easier to scale the business. We're seeing the similar kind of things for life sciences or healthcare innovation. The advances in confluence of advances in technology and sciences so happens to be happening at the same time. So we're at the cusp of things that will drive the whole sector over the next decade. And even the tech companies themselves are recognizing that. With that, there'll be spillover effect to the various parts of whether it's the secondary side, as you were saying, whether it's in the nursing side, the hospital side. It's just that the way in how things are shaped could be a little bit different. So, for example, if do we need as many beds, for example, going forward versus now? There may be changes in how things shape up, right? Because if health tech becomes more accessible to people, there will still be room or a need for hospital beds, obviously, because you can't have everything done at home. But there may be things that people do at home vis-a-vis things that or they can do through virtually, then perhaps needing to go to the hospitals itself. So there'll be opportunities in various parts of the healthcare side. At least that's our take.
Thank you. So I think this brings us a good time for us to introduce our second speaker and panelist, Maran, Mr. Maran Virumandi, Managing Director and co-founder of DoctorOnCall. He's basically in the space of digital healthcare, which is something we probably couldn't have imagined 10 years ago. And he's got quite an interesting business going on with about 4 million visitors, 500,000 customers, 100 doctors, 20 hospitals on his platform. And he's also gonna tell us a bit about the business. But I believe, Maran, maybe you can start off with, recently you had some good news that has been out in the news. I think your DoctorOnCall was recognized as one of the top 5 tech growth companies around. So maybe you could share with us what's that about, and give us a bit of insight on whether DoctorOnCall will replace the doctors out there, and what's this about? Is this about robotics, or is this about how we interact? If you could start with that first. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish. Hope everyone can hear me out there. And thank you again for starting with a scandalous topic like digital health replacing doctors. Well, rest assured to many of the members who are probably listening in or tuning in from outside, I don't think that's on the cards in the near horizon. But it was closer to the point that you were saying, Girish. It was a pleasant surprise early on this week to find that we were listed in Forbes top 100 in Asia. There are obviously a few other players in Malaysia that joined us in this esteemed list. And I think it's, it's an indication that a lot of the work that we've been doing around the provision of online healthcare services, as well as connecting the various parties within the healthcare ecosystem, has now been recognized, right? It's a bit unfortunate that we are facing this pandemic over here, but it actually definitely shines a spotlight on how online healthcare, digital healthcare, and the various associated services such as telehealth, medication delivery, healthcare bookings, preventive healthcare education has all been a real major utility or service that's been used by millions of Malaysians. Coming closer to, as a bit of an introduction to DoctorOnCall, because I'm sure there are people who have used our services, who have read about this type of services, but to many Malaysians, it remains a fairly new set of services or a new ecosystem, right, and platform that they're not too used to. We started this journey about close to 5 to 6 years ago now. It was with a clear vision that there needs to be something new, right? A new channel, a new modality in terms of solving a lot of the structural problems that were facing Malaysia at that point in time, and obviously continues to plague us. So we had a vision to offer a platform that was going to solve some of the key issues around the provision of healthcare services in a more accessible manner, as well as in a more affordable manner. And it's interesting that you showed a couple of slides earlier on in the presentation that showed the doctor-patient ratio, right, of around 1 to 400. But if you actually peel the onion over there, you'll realize that it actually paints a different story when you go out to the more remote areas of East Malaysia or East Coast, where the numbers are anything between 1 to 1,000. Right, I don't have the exact numbers over here, but I'm sure we appreciate that out here in Klang Valley, it'll be skewed to a very much tighter ratio of 1 to 200. But out there, it's a completely different picture. And from affordability perspective, again, although the healthcare CAGR is only increasing perhaps on a 4 to 5% level on a macro perspective, but the payments out of pockets for many of the Malaysians, based on a lot of anecdotal examples, statements issued out by the insurance companies and the employee benefit partners that we work with, as well as our study into healthcare expenses, is actually growing at a far more rapid pace of anything between 15 to 20% year on year, right? And a lot of that is driven by structural problems and long-term trends around the rise of chronic conditions. Again, I'm not going to bore the crowd over here that's mainly made of medical practitioners. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the fact that conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, heart problems, and all are growing at a very rapid pace, largely driven by our lifestyle as well as the aging population, right? There also, I think, a lot of other structural issues around very, very contentious topic around, the fee-for-service model, the separation of prescription and dispensing, the managed care services, and so on, right? So we started off with a very simple focus on accessibility and affordability, and being the geeks that we are, coming from a technology background, we decided to tackle it in the way that we best knew how to, right? In a very focused approach, starting off with healthcare education. So to the point that you made about 4 million Malaysians visiting us on a monthly basis, we were, again, taken back at the hunger for preventive health materials, right? Topics such as kencing manis, darah tinggi, and various other healthcare topics, obviously, around COVID-19, and but a lot of other key issues, right, around family planning or mental health, sexual health, and those matters are severely lacking in the online healthcare space, at least in a manner that's done in a through responsible healthcare content provision. And so what we did was we worked with our partners to come up with materials which were easy to consume, right, by the lay people out there, and the people who do not have a doctor, a family doctor, or a family pharmacist or healthcare professional that they could rely on. And so their healthcare journey will typically start off with jumping online and searching on Google or Facebook or various other platforms. And I think it's also interesting to many people out there to find out that about 3/4 of the population, close to 76% of the population, based on a recent study, starts their healthcare journey online, right? Through searching for medical professionals or pharmacists or various other topics. And so with that laser focus on trying to solve that fundamental issue, we were fortunate that we had backers, funding partners, right, who had a very long-term view on terms of solving these key issues, and were willing to partner with us in making those strategic bets, right? Obviously, it was a very interesting journey in which, you know, we worked with partners who were open to us experimenting and obviously making a lot more mistakes than having successes, but along the way learning from those experiments to actually then right fit our business model as well as our service framework and service set to the clients. And since then, we've grown in strength to include services like telehealth, the online pharmacy, medication delivery services, concierge, healthcare management programs for our insurers and corporate employee benefit partners, and various other services, right? So now we count ourselves blessed to actually have the likes of 10 insurers, as well as various other third-party administrators, hundreds of corporates, as well as close to 1,000 over medical professionals on our platform. So it's actually a very vibrant ecosystem of not only the payers, be people like you and me paying out of pocket, as well as the insurers and the employee benefit programs, managers, as well as the providers on the supply side of things, who are providing their professional services and their medical goods through our platform, right?
Thank you. Can I just pause 1 minute, and can you maybe share with the audience, if you could go back in time and sort of adjust some of the mistakes or, you know, those barriers which you didn't foresee, you know, could you share with the audience, you know, as an entrepreneur in the space of healthcare, and we're talking about private equity, you know, what are those things you could probably share to other, you know, people who are looking at venturing into healthcare or digital healthcare or in the space? Is there something you could share with the audience on what you would probably do a bit differently?
Well, it's a long litany of you know, of things that we could have done better, right? But nevertheless, perhaps one of the more fundamental areas that we could have improved, and we are now seeking to improve, is in the education of the medical providers, right? Be it the medical professionals, as well as the medical institutions, and the people who are either decision makers or gatekeepers, in terms of helping them understand that unlike and correct some of the, I suppose, some of the fundamental misconceptions that they could have. And I think it could go back to the joke that you had around replacing these institutions. So I think there's a big fear and obviously a major roadblock that online healthcare will disintermediate the medical professionals from the actual payers as well as patients. And in terms of that, in the next steps would actually replace them, right? Obviously, looking at how the Airbnbs have disrupted the entertainment or hotel industry or the ride-hailing services and some fintech, there's this overarching fear that the new disruptors will not only disrupt, but actually eat into a large chunk of the revenues and replace these organizations. So the best way of allaying that concerns and also getting them to partner with us is for them to understand how that is it's actually almost impossible to be done in the healthcare space because of the regulated nature of the industry, as well as the deep skill sets that both the hospital institutions, the medical institutions, and the medical professionals have, right? And what we're providing is just a new modality, a new business model, a new channel, and that education is something that we could have done a lot better, but perhaps we didn't do because we were coming out from the outside of the industry. We were external parties coming into to a new industry.
Sure. Thank you for that insight. So this is a good time for us to introduce Rafiza, our third speaker, and she's the CEO of Cradle, and she became the CEO during the pandemic. And Cradle under MHC is an early stage grant provider, and its healthcare is actually one of the My STIE, which is a 10 by 10 matrix that MHC has, and healthcare is one of the verticals. Rafiza has had more than 25 years in corporate and banking, and she was one of the pioneers in Dana Harta. And she's got a sort of a mantra that she wants Malaysians to take better care of their health, to be more proactive rather than reactive. So welcome, Rafiza. I think what I'd like you to maybe start off with is a bit about Cradle for those of people who are looking for startup grants, what's out there, and maybe drill it down a bit into the smaller new startups. How do you see them in the space of healthcare? And then we could bring everyone around. And we've been talking about this regulatory word keeps coming back. I think we could have a good discussion around, what we need to do to make it more easier for private equity in Malaysia and healthcare. Over to you, Rafiza.
Thank you, Girish. First of all, I want to thank the host for having me here. It's an honor, and also to be on the same panel as the distinguished panelists. Just to give you a little bit of a background, so we are owned by the Ministry of Finance, but reporting to the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. Cradle has been around since 2003, and we are the early stage tech startup grant provider, and we have provided grants to over 1,000 startups. Maran is on one of our honor list, and yes. We also have a very small seed venture arm, so we have about 38 investee companies. So Health Metric is one of our investee company. The role of Cradle is very much, with the healthcare. As you know, late last year, the ministry, launched the Dasar Science, Technology and Inovasi Negara. So the main purpose of that 10-year blueprint is to introduce this, what Girish mentioned earlier, the 10 by 10, what we call it, the socio-economic driver against the technology driver, and healthcare is one of the verticals. Now, the purpose of that, that policy is to make Malaysia as a developer and producer of technology and sciences as opposed to the adopter. So, and we all know, especially at the early stage startups, I mean, we're talking about, the topic that we have here is private equity, but, I would like to emphasize the role of, government grants, the likes of us and our sister agencies, is that when it comes to healthcare, it's not easy to get, especially at the early stage, not easy to get, private money. Very easy to get, for people to invest in, say, for example, e-commerce, fintech, where the commercial value can be seen immediately. Whereas in healthcare, it takes a lot, like what, Maran mentioned, it takes a lot of mistakes, a lot of, pivoting, and, it's more of a medium term, long term. And that's where we come in, government intervention needs to come in to de-risk, private investments, so that, when these turn into real investable commercial value vehicles, then we can have the likes of Xeraya Capital, hopefully, they can invest in some of these Malaysians technology or sciences, innovators. So that's where I'm coming from. And as, if I could just share with you the slides that I have, next slide. So I just want to show, this is the 10 by 10 that is provided by the government. And this was introduced last year. So the ones that I have that we provided, that we approved the last 2 years, until it came, we didn't really map it against this 10 by 10. But moving forward, this is where the priority of the government, especially for the next 10 years, and a lot of resources, from various, mainly from our ministry, will go into this. And like I said, medical and healthcare is one of this. And we want to encourage more private parties to come up with technologies on the technology, which is on the left column, on the advanced, like for example, augmented analytics and data discovery, neurotechnology, bioscience technology. So those are the areas that, we will be looking for, and hopefully we can have Malaysian startups, Malaysian-owned, that is in this area. Okay, and if I can share with you slide number 4, sorry. Yeah, so as I say, this is one of the problem statement that was provided by the ministry, and it's on the medical and healthcare. This is not from Cradle, but this is actually launched by MHC. If you can go back to the earlier slide. Early this year, they launched a 230 million worth of grants, and this is one of the problem statement. And like I said, again, this is to encourage private parties to come up with these technologies. Government will provide, the grants, and if they are under Cradle, then what we'll do, as you know, because we've been around for, since 2003, we have a lot of insights to work with the likes, all the things that we learned when we were working very closely with Maran, we can hopefully start to nurture the new startups. So, at Cradle, we don't just provide grants, we provide value-added services. So, of course, Maran, coming from Accenture, he doesn't need a lot of coaching, but you have a lot of those startup founders, technologists out there who are very good at the technology, but probably needs a little bit of a coaching and mentoring when it comes to, say, for example, pitching to investors, how to manage their business, make sure that they have the right team to work, all these secret recipes that makes successful startups. And that's why we have this, our mantra is, to create leading startups. Yeah.
Thank you. Rafiza, could you tell us a bit about, maybe we can stop sharing the screen and have a wider conversation here as well with all the panelists. Could you tell us a bit about the regulatory aspects in Malaysia on healthcare and private equity? And there is also a question on the chat which talks about the business models, where there seems to be a different set of investors entering healthcare, which are grouping up businesses and rolling them up and selling them for above average returns. Is there something going on here? Is it a vibrant space? Are you seeing a lot of applications coming into Mosti? Are there a lot of businesses that are being set up right now in this space?
Okay, first I'll address your your thing on regulatory. So like I said, and this is where government intervention is required, especially if we want to create more tech healthcare startups, right? Because of the regulatory issue. And Maran can give you a a day talk on that, because we've had a lot of conversations on this. I know not to say anything, but at the moment, especially at the moment, where the acceleration of the digitalization, especially the healthcare service, is far faster than than the regulatory can catch up to, and that's why Mosti last year launched the National Technology Innovations Sandbox, NTIS, and Maran is one of that's where we work together with the healthcare startups and really deep down on their issues, some of the, I would call it, the regulatory challenges, that sort of pull them down so that they can scale. And we work with the relevant ministry. So like, for example, the health ministry in this case, and to see how, because at the end of the day, it's all about communication, it's all about engagement. So that's how we facilitate, and to really spur the healthcare technology startups ecosystem. So that's on the regulatory issue. Now, on the bundling of investments, we don't see that yet because I feel the likes of, say, for example, Maran, and we also have a number of our tech startups, like, for example, Naluri, Biogenes, Medcard, among others. Healthcare is one of the priority in our evaluation criteria. So they all have their own niche, and sometimes it's better for them to really concentrate on their area rather than bundling them up. With respect to applications, we are seeing, like I said, we are seeing a lot of digital sort of platform, which we try to shy away, because I think there's already quite a lot of it. We have a lot of online platform, and the good thing is DoctorOnCall is one of the pioneers, so they've got an advantage for it. So we try to see if they can meet those technology drivers that I mentioned earlier. We want to promote gaps. We want to, like, for example, we have a number of COVID vaccine that we are looking at, or COVID-19 testing, because we want to make sure that we don't rely on on overseas products, because like you can see at the beginning of the year, mostly was KKM was having huge issues on getting supplies because we are too reliant on them. So moving forward, and we know that this is not going to end immediately. This is COVID-19. What else after this? Could we really put our resources and time and funds to producing this, so that we can be dependent moving forward, and we learn our lessons, and we can see what's the outcome of those gaps. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I'd like to move on to Fares, taking from what Rafiza mentioned. If we go back to the brick and mortar type of healthcare and leave the digital out of it, and look at the more physical and the biological side, of revolution. Is there something that you see Malaysia sort of has a little bit of an edge? You talked about lower cost in terms of Singapore, and is there something that we could maybe move into in a more structured manner from a private equity space, leaving the digital side out of it?
Okay, thanks for the question, although that's not quite my area in terms of bricks and mortars per se, to be honest. And I think it's, I appreciate the question that if we take out the innovation and digital side of it, how does it look? But it's also a difficult thing to do, because we can't ignore that digital transformation is here and real. And as Maran was saying, it can displace existing type of business models. So I guess if we go specifically to the portfolio company that I mentioned, where one of the things that's happening now is the innovation within architecture itself of making things modular. So it's not the usual or traditional way of creating a fermentation process that takes up a lot of space than what's happening these days. And for that, you don't really need as much space. You can actually, if you talk about vaccines, you can actually, within a smaller space, create a manufacturing facility that can supply the whole of Southeast Asia population within, say, a floor of a building. So in that context, it doesn't necessarily make Malaysia competitive versus, say, Singapore, because they don't have as much space. So I'm trying to think within the context of, and if you talk about land per se, then you'll be competing with the likes of Indonesia also, right? Because so for us, we look at life sciences to include agriculture, and agriculture includes basically a lot more land area, and that's where most of the trials that say our portfolio companies would prefer to do, they prefer to do it in Indonesia. So again, I'm not too sure if we focus too much on let's try and make it an asset base and cut out the digital part of it and see how we could be competitive. I think we can be competitive if we include the digital side of it. It's more of making sure that the business, I think Maran is and some of the companies that Rafiza mentioned is doing in the right direction to begin with. So again, sorry, I'm probably not answering the question of how can Malaysia be competitive on an asset type. Yeah.
No,
I'll stop there. Yeah.
Maybe there is a question that's actually directed to you, Fariz, on whether whether Xeraya invests in brownfield or greenfield businesses, and also around medical centers, if Xeraya invests in medical centers specifically.
Yeah, so for us, we as a because centers would be asset type of investing, and our preference is to what extent can we capture value, to what extent, because ultimately our investors want to make a return. And if there's a bit more color into how that medical center can capture the value and provide the return to investors, then perhaps. But more often than not, vis-a-vis the, because we do look at about 400 over deals a year, vis-a-vis some of the other opportunities, they tend to not be as providing the best, competitive risk return vis-a-vis some of the other less asset type of opportunities that we look at.
Okay, thank you. Maran, there is a question from the audience on whether digital health can improve treatment outcomes like medication adherence issues.
Right. So perhaps I can. Okay, Encik Ambrahi is obviously an expert in this field. I mean, I think he doesn't require any introduction from a pharmaceutical perspective, and you know, I would be the least qualified person, being a non-medical professional, to actually answer that question, especially live on air. So I would certainly like to you know, engage with Encik Ambrahi on a separate channel to discuss that, and also get, you know, I'm sure, a wealth of information from his years at being in the leadership of organizations, pharmaceutical organizations, in terms of how we can work together, right, between the platforms and the providers as well as the professionals such as him. But perhaps I can just take a little bit of a stab at the question that you asked earlier, Girish, to Encik Amirul, right, regarding at least from online healthcare perspective. I think we just need to understand also the national importance of investing, of private equity organizations or venture organizations, or even, you know, taking it to the IPO or the list, the capital markets, right? From a healthcare perspective, because if you just look at the stats out there, I'll just quote you a number, right? Like India's health tech, which is just a couple of years ahead of Malaysia, right? So they're not as mature as how it is in the US and in China. Is expected to grow to about close to 400 billion US dollars in a couple of years' time. But more importantly, it's expected to create 40 million new high-skilled jobs around you know, artificial intelligence, around health tech, around the SaaS model for healthcare professionals, around very new types of roles. It's not the conventional doctor, pharmacist, and lab professional, but it is actually roles that combines biotech, artificial intelligence, high technology, as well as the medical professionals, right? And so this type of new roles around elevating the state of the medical professionals. We've been hearing a lot about them having, you know, issues in terms of employment, in terms of contract, those kind of issues, as well as the issues I mentioned earlier around the unchecked climb of healthcare costs, right, or the lack of healthcare education, right, can only be facilitated by big and long-term investments into these nascent or new fields, be it online healthcare, digital health, or even the more exotic version, at least exotic to me, of what Amirul was mentioning, right, regarding investments into you know, mRNA, and into, you know, into the drug discovery or the product discovery process. So I think we just have to keep that in mind and do that, because if we don't do that, if we don't take a concerted approach, right, it's going to be, our industry is going to be left behind as compared to the other countries, because you can already see countries like Indonesia and Singapore, who started at pretty much the same pace as us, at least from an online healthcare perspective, are now making large scales investment, and also making large leaps in terms of their advancements. So I'm not going to get into the deal size that's happening in Singapore and Indonesia. I think it's public knowledge, but I think more importantly is the fact that the so-called Grabs or Gojeks or such players are going to be coming out of those countries simply because they have large-scale investments, which attracts the right kind of talent, and also the right kind of infrastructure, and sets up the right infrastructure.
Thank you. So we've got a few more minutes. Maybe I'll go one question for the three of you, and give us your final thoughts in that answer. So we seem to see opportunities from what I'm hearing. There are tremendous opportunities, but what we're lacking are probably, I'm not sure, is it the private sector that's a bit too risk averse? Is it the funders who are risk averse to invest in this space? Maybe the question would be, what should we do better as Malaysians looking at the sector to grow FDIs, create more jobs, take hold of the opportunity out there. And having seen the last 12 months with a massive impact on healthcare with the pandemic, is there something, your thoughts, where should we intervene? Who should do it? Is it government? Is it private sector? Just a sort of a single thought solution wrap up from each. We can start with maybe Rafiza.
Thanks. So to me, we have looked at various. So, for example, I'm talking on specifically on the startup ecosystem and healthcare. That will also apply as well. When we look at the the successful ecosystem players, it has to be coordinated and complemented between the government, private sectors, players, in this case, both doctors and the customers. I think one of the things that I just wanted to bring up is that, when it comes to the healthcare technology, and if you're talking specifically on the digital space, we really need to look at the, from the customer point of view. So sometimes I have attempted to sort of work with a number of healthcare institutions to see how we can digitalize them, and make it better, make their services a lot more inclusive. There is a little bit of a pushback from them because maybe from them the priorities on the user experience is not on the high list, and rightfully, because doctors, all they care about saving their patients, right? And that's where we found that we have attempted to sort of digitalize it, and I'm talking about, this is pre-COVID, this is like about 6-7 years ago. Whenever we try to push for the idea of digitalization and making healthcare more accessible to a lot of people with the right price points, it's not something on the priority, but perhaps I would really like, my wish list is for the healthcare, especially on the private side, maybe a little bit more challenging on the public healthcare side, but especially on the private side. We are seeing some leaders, there's a few which are already embarking on their digital journey, but a lot of it is because of COVID. I just wish that it's a lot more proactive rather than reactive, and and make healthcare affordable, for everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. How about Faris? What would you say as a final sort of wish list in this space?
Yeah. For me, it goes on with some of the discussions that we had in session 1, and what's going on in the country, and I think it was quite obvious, or what came out, at least to me, was from the sessions, was that the level of importance in healthcare is not as high as it should be. Right, there was talk about we should do reforms, the capital allocation within the public services side is not high enough, and the organizations of providers and so forth isn't done, and there needs to be a rethink. So one is, and it's become obvious, I think, from this pandemic, that the healthcare sector ought to be strategic or increase importance from wherever the level is now, because it's clearly not quite there. And from there, it's a question of, I guess that's more of a government thing. And if we look at it from a let's call it, say, an orchestra kind of thing. So the conductor, being the government, needs to say, this is the piece of music that needs to be played. And then, being the conductor that it is, the violinist, the cello, and then all that needs to be played to that piece. So whether it is Cradle having the allocations accordingly, and so forth, because the issue is we don't have infinite resources, and we don't have much capital. And if this can be identified as important to the country or strategic to the country, then there needs to be a shift in terms of capital allocation, focus, energy, and so forth in this area, because clearly it's needed. And that will flow through in terms of how others would be looking at it. And the thing is that if you were to do that, it's not as if you're going against the flow, because if you look at what's happening out there in terms of impact investing or ESG, where you're looking at how do you invest to impact either people, planet, of which healthcare comes under the people bit or the social bit. There's a I guess a massive move in that direction anyway. So even if there's a concern of are we going against the tide, it doesn't feel as though it's going against the tide, because the tide is moving in that direction. And as when the conductor starts moving in that direction, the private sector itself, they should have a better feel of what's going on out there outside of Malaysia itself. I think you showed some data in Singapore, where from 2020 onwards, the numbers are moving up. Then it will all start to flow through, because for us as an investor is that we need to syndicate the and if it's just us alone investing, then the level of risk becomes much higher. But if there are groups of other investors that co-invest with us, as we have with some of the other portfolio companies, then it de-risk the opportunity itself, and then you can see investment in the levels of innovation in say startup becomes higher, and following the startups also is there, and then the whole thing becomes more the whole music, it's music to the ears, right? As opposed to not playing the
Yeah, thank you. So we've got about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes left. What I will do is I'm going to put Maran on the spot and ask him a yes or no question. But before that, I'd just like to thank all the panelists for attending. And I think we got a lot of conversation that we need to have around financing structures. I think we're going to talk about, all the conclusions around pushback from doctors on digitalization and the level of importance in healthcare, which Faris was talking about, I think is something that we need another session to deal with. But what I'm also hearing is the involvement of government to sort of orchestrate this change and capture opportunities. So to end, Maran, can you tell us if with your solutions, you're going to reduce my healthcare bill in the next 5 years?
That's certainly the ambition, Girish. But then again, there's a lot of external factors, right, that will contribute to a particular individual's healthcare bill. But I would actually like to bring up a comment that just came up in the chat bot, the chat, right, that talked about the National Healthcare Financing Scheme, again by Inci Ambrahi. I think it kind of puts the perspective, right, to what Amirul and Rafiza was saying, that there needs to be a huge framework or plan that's put up for, because healthcare is a national topic. It should be elevated to the national agenda, so that the various parties, I believe DoctorOnCall is just a cog in the entire scheme of things, and Cradle's there to provide venture fund, Xeraya is there to provide certain funds, but if you think about out loud that 70% of the people in Malaysia are underinsured or not insured at all, then the topic about providing various schemes to reduce the healthcare bill or to provide sufficient coverage, be it through online, be it through insurance companies, through various other topics, needs to be put out there. And I don't think that's just the role of individual players such as us to actually do that, right? It needs to be it's part of a comprehensive program, and hopefully that's what's going to come out of this kind of conversations. And perhaps when the government's more settled down.
I've got to cut you there because we've run out of time. So thank you everyone for joining us today and for this session. I'm going to hand back to the MC, and everybody stay safe, practice your SOPs, and wear those masks and wash those hands. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.